So as he said, my name is Pam Novy. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Before I started to work for Virginia NORML as the executive director, actually volunteered to be the executive director, I had an interesting background. I attended the University of Vermont and got a PhD in clinical psychology. Part of the work, my research work there, was actually working in substance abuse. I worked in a place called the Human Behavioral Pharmacology Lab, where we did various research on effective treatments for nicotine, cocaine, heroin, and also marijuana. What I learned when I was a grad student is that if you wanted to do any type of research on any positive or benefits of marijuana, you could not get any money. And really, it's still that way. It's changed a little bit, but there's most of the money, the funding is from the government, and it's from the substance abuse perspective through the National Institute of Drug Abuse and other organizations. And so it's difficult to do, or it was at that time very difficult to do any positive research. I'm also a veteran. After I left the University of Vermont, I worked as a clinical psychologist in the Air Force. I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, working as a combat operational stress psychologist, traveling around both countries. Back in the States, I ran a 3-week intensive outpatient program for post-traumatic stress disorder at Walter Reed Army Medical Center. No longer in the military, and I've chosen to take on advocacy for marijuana policy reform. This is a little bit about what I'm going to talk about today. This is just an outline. Let me first tell you a little bit about my organization. The National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws is a national organization. We have a Virginia chapter with several affiliate chapters around the state. National NORML was founded in 1970. It's a non-profit organization. And disclaimer, we are advocates for a safe and regulated market for marijuana and responsible use by adults. Now notice I didn't say children or teenagers, responsible use by adults. So first of all, what is marijuana? You'll notice, I don't know if you remember my opening slide, I said marijuana prohibition, harming Americans since 1937. Well, we're coming up on the anniversary of the Marijuana Tax Act, which August 3rd, 1937, that's when marijuana prohibition actually began. But the real war on marijuana did not begin until the 70s. It's a Schedule I drug, according to the Drug Enforcement Agency. And what that means is that it has a high potential for abuse. This is according to the DEA. Has no currently accepted medical treatment use in the United States. That there's a lack of accepted safety for use under medical supervision. And no prescriptions may be written for Schedule I drugs. So you'll notice in states where it's legal, it's a recommendation that you get from a physician. Other Schedule I drugs or substances include heroin, Quaaludes. I was looking, does anybody even know what Quaaludes are anymore? That was a 70s thing.
Yeah, bring it back, man.
That's why I had to look that up. I haven't heard that name in a while. LSD and then a few other ones. Now, you'll notice THC is still considered a Schedule I drug, even though it is legal for medical uses in a number of states right now, and there's quite a lot of evidence that it does have medical value. If you've seen the Sanjay Gupta special on TV or the spread in National Geographic, there are definitely medical uses. I came to this movement, a number of things led me to this, but I'm going to tell you a personal story that led me to really start thinking differently about this issue. While I was on a remote assignment in Korea, my son graduated from high school. He was in his first year of college, and not in Virginia, in a different state. And one night, 19 years old, he was in the Taco John's parking lot in his 1973 orange Volkswagen Beetle with a Grateful Dead sticker on the back, splitting up a bag of weed with a couple of other college students who were also pizza delivery. They all worked pizza delivery restaurant stuff. As he was leaving the parking lot, the cop came in, the exit. Long story short, he was arrested, and with less than an ounce of marijuana, got a 6-month jail sentence. Actually didn't spend the whole 6 months there, spent a little over 3 months there for less than an ounce of marijuana, no weapons, no other previous trouble, was an honor student, was a thespian, was involved in local community activities, was basically a good kid. Now, after that, my son did not want to stop smoking pot. Didn't want to. He didn't understand. If I just do this in the evenings after work, what's the big deal? I don't understand. And being his mother, I said, I don't care what you do what you got to do. You got to stop smoking pot. You're never going to get off probation. Just get it done. And so he did. He started drinking instead, because he could drink and go in and pass a drug test, but he couldn't smoke pot and go in and pass a drug test. Well, since then, he's become quite the professional drinker. He's a very, what I would call, a functioning alcoholic. Does great at work, but drinks until he passes out every night, and just a few months ago was so drunk, he passed out and hit a parked car a mile or so, not even a mile, a couple of blocks from where we were staying at that time in North Dakota. This happened just this past summer. He has not stopped drinking, but my hope is that we will someday have a legal alternative to alcohol, a far more dangerous substance than marijuana, and that's going to be the focus of what I'll talk about today. Now, the CDC says that there are 37,000 annual deaths in the United States attributed to alcohol use alone. That's not including accidental deaths. Alcohol overdose can be fatal. You can drink so much that you can die, but there's no such thing as a lethal dose of marijuana, or nobody has ever been able to. It would be impossible to take in that much, to have a lethal dose of marijuana. 0 overdose deaths. Each year, in fact, 2,200 Americans die from alcohol poisoning. And like I said, there's never been a fatal marijuana overdose. So let's talk about some of the differences between alcohol and marijuana. First of all, brain damage. Alcohol use definitely damages the brain. There's no question about that. Now, marijuana, some of the more recent research suggests that there may be some actually neuroprotective benefits of marijuana. Addiction potential, I'll talk a little bit more about that with the next slide, but alcohol has a much higher addiction potential. Withdrawal. You can die from alcohol withdrawal. Now, there's some debate about whether there's actually a marijuana withdrawal syndrome, and I actually brought an article that I helped write, one of the first articles, suggesting that there actually is a marijuana withdrawal syndrome. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but the point is, marijuana withdrawal, if such a thing exists, is very mild compared to alcohol withdrawal. It will not kill you, and it's been compared more to nicotine and caffeine withdrawal, although it's not exactly the same, it's mild, certainly compared to withdrawal from heroin, alcohol, and some other drugs. So risk of personal injury, 36% of hospitalized assaults are attributed to alcohol. 36% of hospitalized assaults are attributed to alcohol. 21% of all injuries are attributed to alcohol use. There's no evidence, however, that marijuana increases risk-taking behavior or violent behavior, especially domestic violence. In fact, there's some research that suggests that marijuana use actually decreases the likelihood of domestic partner abuse. Now, the unintended consequences of criminal penalties for marijuana use or marijuana possession and any of the criminal penalties for marijuana mostly affect young people. Over 60% of the people who are arrested are young people, people under 25. These are people who are the age, my children are, a little bit older now, my kids are 29 and 30. But these are young people who are about to launch into their lives, and they lose their driver's license, they'll have trouble getting student loans, they have difficulty getting a job, they have the stigma of an arrest. All of these things at a time when they should be at a launching off point in their life. Instead, we are keeping them stagnant, sometimes for years because of delays in the court system and the penalties that they have to pay in terms of jail time or probation. This, of course, affects their employment and earning potential. As I said, they lose their driver's licenses, and if they do jail time, well, guess where you learn about real criminal activity. That would be jail. That's a good place to go to learn about criminal activity. So the consequences of our prohibition laws, our marijuana prohibition, are far worse than the substance itself. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about addiction. We can talk about it if you ask some questions at the end. But in terms of addiction potential, the most recent study, and they all say about the same thing, but alcohol has a much greater addiction potential than marijuana. Alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine actually all have a greater addiction potential in the current literature. So what is addiction anyway? I would encourage you to take a look at a TED Talk that recently came out by Johann Hari about, and what he talks about is that addiction is not just about the chemical hooks in a substance, but it's also about the experience of the addict that leads them to their addiction. And that has to do with punishment, shame, isolation, absence of alternative reinforcers. When we put people in jail, we are actually putting them in a situation where their addiction can flourish, and which is exactly the opposite of what we should do. That's the premise of his talk and his book. There's a lot to that. So I think my time is 1 more minute, just about up. What I'd like to conclude with, I don't know if you can see this, but here are some of the references, just a few references actually, and some books that I personally own that I've left on the piano over here. So afterwards, if you want to take a look at them, that would be fine. And I look forward to your questions at the end.
Thank you, Pam.